In this episode of Ottawa Business Journal's Behind the Headlines, a local landlord shakes up a major Hintonburg development project. MDS Aero soars past major milestone, and a glimpse at the long post-pandemic recovery faced by a venue and event sector. All this and more coming up right now. Behind the Headlines is brought to you by Nelligan Law. Their profession is the law, their product is peace of mind. Hello and welcome to Behind the Headlines for the week of June 21st, 2021. I'm Michael Kern from the Ottawa Business Journal. Behind the Headlines is a regular podcast series from OBJ to explore the most popular stories in Ottawa. I'm happy to be joined, as always, by my two colleagues from OBJ. Here's Peter Kavesi and David Sally. Hello to you both. Hi, Mike. Looking forward to a good issue here. So we're going to dig right into this. Really interesting story to start off with. A development company called CLV is taking the lead on a big Hintonburg project. This is 3 residential towers planned for Gladstone Avenue, which is right beside the O train line, if you can picture it. That's right beside the future Corso Italia LRT station. Kind of cool name. I didn't know that was the name, by the way. And we learned this week the developers have had to start construction until early 2023, but there have been some significant changes to the project. Peter, give us an update on this.
So this is a development project that was originally spearheaded by Trinity Development Group in partnership with CLV and PBC Real Estate Advisors. So what we learned last week is that CLV has now taken the lead. They're going to be now the lead developer of the project. They've purchased Trinity's stake. They purchased Trinity's stake late last year with the backing of an unidentified silent investor. What's particularly interesting about this story is that CLV here in Ottawa is arguably best known as a property manager. They have one of the largest portfolios of rental units in the city. So this move really does shine a light on not only just their development operations, but really I think illustrates the size and scale of their development ambitions. Here's just one other example from Southern Ontario. In Burlington, which is just west of Toronto, CLV spent several years assembling several land parcels immediately adjacent to the Burlington GO train station, which for those who aren't familiar with Southern Ontario, it's a really high capacity rail line that links various Southern Ontario communities. And a couple of years ago, CLV entered into a partnership agreement with Interrent and Brookfield to develop again this project. So you sort of again, CLV is really taking on some ambitious development projects, transit-oriented development projects that have the potential to reshape entire communities.
And Dave, that's not the only change to the project. Tell us about the other big change.
Well, that's right, Mike. So yeah, in addition to the change in the ownership structure, there's also been a bit of a shift in the actual in the actual composition of the development, in the sense that they've added more units. Now, the original proposal, when they downsized it, because initially these towers are going to be taller, there were 41, 35, and 30 in the initial iteration. Then they were downsized 2 years ago to the current heights. And at that time, they were going to have 745 units. Now they're looking at 850 units. And that's going to be a mix of rental units and condos. Now, exactly what that ratio is going to be, they don't know yet. I was speaking with CLV President Oz Druniak recently, and he said that mix will depend on market demand. It's still pretty early in the process. They're really just getting the zoning approval process going here, so we know that takes a little while to get through City Hall and do all the consultations. So it's likely going to be going to be a little while yet, 2023, before they start construction. So they've got some time yet to figure out what the mix will be. It's definitely going to be in the typical range of studio 1, 2, 3 bedroom units. But what the final design will be is still to be determined. We do know, of course, that that's a heritage site. The Standard Bread building is right there at 951 Gladstone. That was that was built back in 1924. It's a very familiar white building there. That's now it's an artist's sort of it's used for studio space for artists, and it's going to continue to be used for that once the development is complete. It's going to be entirely renovated, retrofitted, restored. The exterior is going to be restored to its original state as much as possible, and then those units will be rented back out to artists to use as studio space at below market rates. So this is going to be a pretty interesting project, which is also going to include office and retail space. So meant to, of course, kind of provide more mix of retail, commercial, office space right there on the Trillium line when it opens, hopefully late next year, when that line starts running, and the developers really expect there's going to be big demand along that corridor.
The project, for me, is intriguing in so many ways. One is just its location. It kind of straddles Hintonburg and also the Little Italy type side. But then the heritage aspect too has me really curious about what will happen. So it's got the O train, it's got heritage, a mixed use building now, and two interesting neighborhoods. It'll be something we need to keep on following. I'm sure you'll do that, Dave. Listen, story number 2 involves a company called MDS Aero Support. And pardon the pun, it often flies under the radar here in Ottawa. But if you go outside of Ottawa, particularly to some of the biggest companies in the world, it's known as a world leader in designing and building gas turbine engine testing facility. So it does the testing facility, doesn't build the engine. So earlier in the pandemic, MDS saw its revenue plummet, probably, because the people in the aerospace sector pressed giant pause button right there. But now it seems to be back on track, and as we say, has plenty of runway for growth. Dave, tell us about the big milestone it hit recently. Very significant.
Yeah, absolutely. Like this was a huge project. I mean, and MDS Aero this is no startup. They've been doing this for over 35 years. So they know what they're doing when it comes to building these facilities, massive facilities that test aircraft engines. But this was the biggest project in their history that they just put the bow on, so to speak, in Derby, England, and it was for a manufacturer that's that has a pretty good reputation. Rolls-Royce, you may have heard of them. So MDS Aero, they designed and built this massive facility in Derby, England, for them to test aircraft engines. This thing is, it's about the area of a football field, 5 stories high, with concrete walls that are about 10 feet thick. And the price tag came in around $155 million. I mean, so these things, these things aren't done lightly. It took 3 years to build this thing. And it just took a ton of engineering. Like they've got the ability here to dangle these engines from the roof, and then Rolls-Royce engineers are going to throw everything literally but the kitchen sink at these things. When the turbine blades spin, they want to figure it. They want to find out just exactly what they can take in terms of punishment. And they'll actually even break the engine on purpose to see what happens. And the other really cool thing is while they're doing all this, they also X-ray the engine with a huge, obviously a giant X-ray machine. This isn't your standard, when you go to the hospital with a broken leg. This is a massive thing. They have to put actually a 1 meter thick steel and concrete shield that slides into place over the entire front of the building, so to protect it from other buildings around it and the workers around it. So, and they worked with Calian, another Ottawa company, on that to design that properly. So it's amazing, and it can do, as I was talking with John Jastrzemski, the CEO, and he put it into very easy to understand terms. That it can measure the thrust of objects as light as a beaver or as heavy as the space shuttle, and the degree of precision they can measure. He said it's the equivalent to detecting putting a $20 bill on a keg full of beer. So, that much of a of a difference in pressure it could detect. Those are terms that I think we can all get a handle on. And so, yeah, as you can imagine, it took a lot of people. MDS has about 450 employees, and about a third of them had a hand in this in one way or the other. And it's and so MDS is really hoping that now that that vaccines are rolling out, the economy is starting to rebound, that the aviation industry is going to bounce back quickly as well. Its revenues were down from about 150 million before COVID to around 100 million in its most recent fiscal year, but it expects to get that back on track very quickly and start regaining altitude again, Mike. And this is just another great local tech story with some really cool stuff going on here.
Yeah, an example of one of those companies where you say that company is located in Ottawa. By the way, it's just off Innes Road. I was in their offices a few months maybe before the pandemic. And there's a great YouTube video, a time-lapse photography of the assembly of that massive football field size building. You could probably Google it. Listen, Peter and Dave, before we explore the last story of the day, I want to bring in our legal expert from Nelligan Law. Craig O'Brien is a partner in the firm's litigation, business insurance, and construction law groups. Welcome, Craig.
Good afternoon, Michael. Good to be here.
Yeah, we're so happy to have you with us here today. So listen, Main Street retailers in particular have been suffering so much. So, I'm envisioning restaurants, small fashion boutiques, stores like that, Craig. And they've been suffering, of course, because they've been shut down and they're under this financial duress. And I imagine that creates a lot of conflict with their landlords, right? They're not able to perform. They can't pay their potentially rent. What advice would you give to these people?
Well, Michael, there's a lot of pain to go around, frankly. Both the landlords and the tenants in that situation are hurting now. Unlike the residential real estate market, commercial landlords, particularly those on High Street, who own 2 or 3 buildings and have their commercial tenants in there, they haven't been provided nearly the same protection as residential mortgages have been. And as a result, you have a lot of pain from the tenants and a lot of pain from the landlords, which really limits the options that either or both have when a commercial tenant is not able to pay their rent. The way that they have been dealing with this thus far, and we've had some pretty decent success in negotiating deals where a commercial tenant will ultimately pay a much reduced amount, but enough to keep the landlord alive, and with the understanding that both need to cooperate for their mutual survival, and that if either pushes their legal rates too hard under the lease, it'll be to their collective detriment.
Wow, this is really interesting. I was thinking about it from the tenant perspective, but you're quite right, saying, well, look, there's 2 parties under duress here. Would I be right in assuming, Craig, that one of the pieces of advice you'd give to a tenant is be proactive in this? Like, start the discussion with your landlord. In other words, don't start ghosting your landlord.
Yes, and sadly, I have not had 100% success at being able to negotiate good deals with landlords on behalf of tenants, and it's almost always because the tenant has attempted to pull an ostrich and put their head in the sand and ignore the problem. And by the time the tenant finally does go to their landlord with a proposal, the goodwill has been utterly exhausted. And in those scenarios, it is really problematic for a commercial tenant.
It always fascinates me, Craig. We're talking about law here, but we're also talking about the dynamics of negotiation and just kind of good faith relationships with suppliers, right? So that must be something you deal with almost on a daily basis.
After a lot of law school, I am doing mainly negotiating deals at this stage of my practice because of exactly that. The commercial tenant wants to keep their space because eventually we will reopen and they will be able to be profitable once again. They don't want to fit up a new space. They don't want to get evicted and have to be battling over their tables and chairs and the equipment and fixtures that are in there. And a commercial landlord wants to keep their tenants in place, because having a vacant storefront unleased for months and months and months causes further damage in an already very difficult financial environment for all of them.
Great advice as always from Nelligan Law. Craig, thanks for being here today.
Thank you.
Thanks again to Craig. We appreciate the ongoing support of Nelligan O'Brien Payne in supporting Behind the Headlines. So let's go to our third and final story of this episode. And this one, I mean, all of them intrigued me, but this one's pretty cool. It involves a Italian banquet facility, or a banquet facility in Little Italy, typically known as a venue really for weddings. Sala San Marco, I'm sure that name is recognized by many of you. It's used for weddings and graduations, anniversary parties, and that's been going on for decades and decades. So now a portion of the facility will become an Italian food store called Mercato Zacconi. It'll carry prepared foods and cheeses and meats and fruits and vegetables, wood-fired pizza, homemade pasta, wine and beer. I think I just want to live there, or at least move in beside the place, because it sounds fantastic. Peter, exciting news for a really interesting neighborhood in the city. But it also says something that's a little bit of a dramatic statement about the fragility around this part of the local economy. And I'm referring to banquet halls and meeting places. Tell us about that.
So, I think it's a pretty easy argument to make that venues and event spaces have been among the hardest hit sectors by COVID-19. What this story really lays bare is how long some people within that sector believe it's going to take for the industry to recover. So just take a bit of a step back, Sala San Marco, like a lot of businesses, when the pandemic first hit last year, they spent a few months just seeing if they could wait it out and seeing how quickly things would bounce back. But by about last fall, it became clear that they needed to be a bit more proactive and start looking at other options. But there's one quote from owner Tony Zacconi that really jumped out, to me. He told our colleague Caroline Phillips, "I think it's going to be a long time before people want to get into a room with 300 other people again." And that just really jumped out to me and made me think, well, even after we're all vaccinated and it's safe in theory to get together again, how quickly are people going to want to get together again in these big, large groups? And, Zacconi also sort of, hinted at, well, is it possible the world has changed as well? Are all the video conferencing tools that have become part of our day-to-day life, are those going to persist and change, permanently change, or at least change for, foreseeable future, how we all get together, how we, meet and gather? So, we've often heard that, the broader tourism and hospitality sector is likely, is the first hit, the hardest hit, and likely going to be the last to recover. So this really sort of puts, I'm going to say, I hate to say it, but it's sort of a face to that narrative. There are, though, a couple other parts of this story that jumped out at me. There were some other shifts within that sector already that were underway. As Zacconi said, that even before the pandemic, the days of the 500-person weddings were sort of in the twilight, and we weren't seeing that many super large gatherings of those types anymore. And one other part of the narrative that really sort of stood out to me is that this is a bit of well, you could say that this is a case of a family business coming full circle a little bit. So Sala San Marco was founded 34 years ago by Zacconi's parents. However, his grandparents before that had actually operated a confectionery store on Bell Street, which is just a little bit east of Preston Street before that. And now the family is getting back into the food retail business. So certainly from that perspective, it's a great Ottawa entrepreneurial story.
I agree with everything said, and also that Preston Street really needed a grocery, right? This is something the business improvement area, the BIA, has been lobbying for years. So I think it's just so clever, right? Instead of sitting back and dealing with uncertainty for an uncertain amount of time, quite frankly, they're kind of got ahead of this. So they'll still have they'll still do what they're best known for, which is hosting events. But then something that they're also kind of known for is great food and that. But they're gonna use that food or sell that food in a different way besides giant 400, 500 Italian weddings. So, listen, Dave, thanks for everything that you've done in the past couple of weeks there, and thanks for your contributions. Peter, we're going to start wrapping up. What are you working on at OBJ, Peter?
Well, one of the most important days in OBJ's calendar is just around the corner. It's the 40 Under 40 annual awards is coming up on June 23rd. Of course, again, unfortunately, this year we're not able to gather all the recipients and all their supporters in person, but we've been doing our part about publishing profiles online at obj.ca of the recipients. And Mike, you've been working really hard in preparing a really special virtual celebration that people should definitely tune into. Tell us a little bit about what you've been hard at work on.
Yeah, we've been at work for 40 Under 40 for months. Decided the recipients. We did a great issue. So in our quarterly print news magazine, we talked about the last time, but what's coming up on this Wednesday, the 23rd, is the show. So we'll have two great guests returning, Mark Sutcliffe and Sandra Plagakis. Mark, co-founder of OBJ way back when, and Sandra, a radio host from KISS FM. They'll be the hosts. We've got a musical guest. Guest will officially present, the 40 Under 40 for the 2021 cohort. We'll hear from them. We've got lots of different clips, hear from notable business leaders sharing their congratulations and insights. So I think it's a great show. Big thanks to Rogers TV, by the way. We're putting this one together as a real professional broadcast, hopefully reaching an even higher level. So that's coming up on Wednesday, June 23rd. I know we're beating people over the head with that. The best place to go to get the watch details, by the way, is go to ottawabot.ca. Go to the calendar section, look at the calendar on June 23rd. There's a link, register, and then you'll get a whole bunch of information on what's happening. So thanks, Peter, for everything that you've done and all the hard work over the last couple of weeks. That brings us to the end of this episode. A reminder, this podcast can be watched if you're on YouTube, you know that, or listened to watch it. Go to OBJ's YouTube channel. Be sure to like and subscribe and click the bell. That way you'll be notified when we post new videos. You can also listen on all major podcast platforms: Spotify, Apple, Google, SoundCloud, Twitch. I encourage you local business news junkies to visit obj.ca. That's our website, of course, every weekday for constantly updated stories. And if you never want to miss a headline, the thing to do is to subscribe to OBJ Today. That's a weekday email newsletter. You can go to obj.ca/newsletter/sign up. On behalf of my colleagues, Peter and David, thanks for tuning in. Please stay connected and stay healthy. Hope to see you real soon. Bye-bye.